Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Biollywood Podcast. In this series, we talk about biological threats and the popular culture media that they appear in. I'm JT O'Brien, Research Principal at the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense, and I am here with the Commission's Executive Director, Dr. Asha M. George.
Hey.
And today, we will be talking about the science fiction movie franchise Alien. The first Alien film came out in 1979 and was directed by Ridley Scott and written by Dan O'Bannon. Then there are several other films after that. Aliens from 1986, which was directed by James Cameron. Alien 3, which came out in 1992, directed by David Fincher. Then Alien Resurrection, 1997, which was directed by Jean-Pierre Jeunet. And then Ridley Scott returned to direct the prequels Prometheus and Alien Covenant. And on August 16th of this year, we'll get the newest installment of the franchise, which is Alien Romulus. We'll predominantly be discussing, the first and the second films, as well as the prequel films, to kind of explore the biological weapons and biodefense aspects of how these movies address those issues. So, the Alien franchise depicts a series of deadly encounters predominantly spanning the 21st and 24th centuries between humanity and the aliens. Humanity is depicted as a spacefaring species with an interstellar dominion. Space journeys typically last months, even years, and require the use of cryosleep. Throughout the series, characters are repeatedly manipulated and endangered by the unscrupulous megacorporation Weyland-Yutani, and they seek to profit from the aliens and try and turn them into a biological weapon. The series fictionalizes the origin of the human race in Prometheus. A member of the ancient humanoid species called the Engineer sacrifices himself and allows his DNA to spark the genesis of mankind. But the Engineer's other experiments were designed to exterminate the human race through the means of a deadly pathogen, and that kind of paves the way for aliens to rise and populate, throughout this universe that we see in the Alien franchise films. So, before we get started, spoiler alert if you have not seen these films, even though they're almost 60 years old, at least the first one, we would recommend you do so. The podcast will contain spoilers for many of the films, if not all of them. So, this is your final warning, and from this point forward, we're going to discuss spoilers. So, to begin, I think we could talk about the pathogen itself, the black goo, or we could talk about the alien life cycle, major characters. What do you think, Asha? Where would you like to start?
I think we should talk with the goo because it kind of implies that it's sort of bloodborne. It looks like it's born by something.
Yeah.
We see it at one point on the character David's finger. And what's interesting about it to me is from a horror story perspective, they humanized it a little bit, right? It looks like it has teeth or something. It's something weird and freaky about it, and it's just in a droplet. So I think it's interesting, but also probably not, accurate in terms of actual microbiology. Obviously, for it to have teeth, it seems,
as a micro,
but interesting, all the same, in that they're showing you something that you can observe even without a microscope.
Right.
That's already weird and strange about it.
Right. I do think that is interesting that without a microscope, you can, just from that one scene where you see the drop of the black goo. I think that was from Prometheus.
I think so, because it's David who has it.
Yeah, and it's not like being able to see teeth with the naked eye. It's something that small is not likely. I don't think either. Maybe on like a microscopic scale, you could see some kind of.
Yeah. I mean, they were trying to show it. But
it's a film.
Right? But technically, what is the definition of a microorganism? And like the tardigrades, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of.
Little teeny tiny things. Do we call them microorganisms, or do we call them something else that are just really tiny?
It's a good question. I'm not sure how, because you can't really see them that well in detail unless they're under a microscope.
But, you know, if you
But
look
they
at
do
them,
look like little bears.
they look like little entities.
Yeah, like little,
and probably have
little
teeth.
animals. Yeah, they
Yeah.
probably do have teeth. So
Yeah. But I think for, you know, look, it's a scenario, right? So
Right.
maybe it is possible. And I think the point there is, however they observed it, whether it was through gross examination or under a microscope, they saw something, or he saw something that was weird and strange,
right.
and yet did absolutely nothing about it. Now, of course, that feeds into the storyline of you know, people taking risks with this stuff for whatever reasons they're doing.
Yeah.
But you know, from our perspective, this is just you know, we're seeing it in one movie after another. It's just really stupid. Who
Right.
does science like that in the first place?
Right.
And then secondly, if you see something that's unusual, whether it's creepy or not, that should be your signal to say, we need to, the whole place is contaminated now. We need to
Right.
like go on high alert.
High alert.
But we don't do that in these movies. And I don't know if that's unrealistic. You know, maybe, you know, because we're just so interested in finding out about new things.
Yeah.
We just, and you know, we are risk-taking species, and in order to make forward movements, you know, accomplish things with science and with other fields, you do have to take some risks. But I think this is like beyond, like even David.
Beyond
David
the
is
pale.
is an android. He doesn't know that this goo isn't going to be able to eat him up, right?
Right, because there has to be some
We don't know.
not synthetic.
David is covered with organic material.
Yeah,
right?
organic
You know?
material. Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense unless, I guess, you know, and we don't want to get all into the AI cyber aspect of this, but if he was programmed, you know, to overcome that risk, you know, aversion,
Yeah.
then I guess it's okay.
Maybe he would.
But we don't see. I mean, look, it took us how many movies does it take us before we get there? It's 1, 2, 3. So this is the 4th movie, right, in the franchise, Prometheus. Before we even find out about the goo, the 5th.
Because there were 4 Alien movies and then Prometheus.
Okay.
And then Alien Covenant. So yeah, we learned about, and a lot of people have issues with this, how it kind of changes the life cycle of the aliens and the xenomorphs. And for like, I personally like Prometheus. I thought it was interesting to kind of get that backstory. But I know a lot of people had problems with it, and I think one of the problems that I had mainly was these are scientists in Prometheus. In the first Alien film, they were not scientists.
Right.
They were cargo shippers, commercial shipping. You know, just answering a distress call, as you would out on the water, if you know that was happening. But even then, Ripley, played by Sigourney Weaver, she recognizes in that first film, we cannot let this man back on board after he's been exposed. It wasn't until the android overrode, you know, her authority and did it himself.
Contrast. He was programmed.
Right, because he was programmed to do it.
For
to bring it back.
Obtaining this organism,
right.
However they found out about it, and then, bringing it back for biological weapons purposes, because that's what that company, at least part of what that company does.
Right. And then contrast that with Prometheus, where it is all scientists. Then you have the one biologist on the team sees that little worm that's been infected by the goo, takes off his helmet, and gets real close to it. That, I think, is unrealistic.
Yeah. I agree.
You know,
or even if it is realistic, you know, that's cause for saying, well, you're not getting back on board this ship.
Yeah, you're not getting
you're
back
out
on.
now.
You're done.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think like the biocontainment aspects of this franchise are really interesting. You know, you don't want to bring these people back on the ship. Okay, now it's on the ship. Can't bring it back to Earth. so on.
But we
and
are
so
bringing
forth.
it back to Earth. Yeah,
That's
I mean,
the
you know,
goal of
that you have
Weyland.
people.
Yeah.
You have people
Weyland-Yutani.
who have decided that this is what they're going to do. So when you look at the NASA mission when it comes to planetary protection, and you read about the forward contamination, the activities to prevent forward contamination and backwards contamination. It's interesting in this entire franchise that there is no, while there seem to be some people who understand the notion that we cannot bring this stuff back to Earth. It's just way too dangerous, no matter what the reason is.
Right.
It's way too dangerous. There are other people who seem to think that they can control it.
Right.
Every single movie, there's somebody there who thinks we got to get a hold of this, and then we're going to bring it back, and we're going to make big bucks because we can control it.
Right.
But obviously that's not. It turns out to be not the case every single time. That concept is very similar to the thinking that was going on right before the United States shut down its offensive biological weapons program.
Right. It's whether or not you could control it.
We could not control it. Right. And the utility of this weapon really was to control geographic areas.
Right.
But then they realized, well, we just can't prevent these diseases from spreading all over the place.
Right.
And even with immunizing people or having antibiotics or whatever, personal protective equipment, we were putting our own troops under too much risk. It was too risky. And I'm sure we were losing people, although we don't have any data to say that that's the case.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It is the same issue. It cannot be controlled, weapons. Except that it's like this massive alien as opposed to microorganisms in weaponized biological agents. So I think, well, first of all, we should say that we do have our recommendation in the latest blueprint for biodefense. We talk about planetary protection,
right,
and we talk about an administrative thing to authorize a particular office, the Office of Planetary Protection in NASA. But the whole point of what we say in that recommendation is we are addressing this forward and backwards contamination business.
Yeah,
and really
there needs to be protocols.
There need to be protocols, and we need to be thinking more. I mean, we don't want to get ridiculous about it, right? You don't want to stop all exploration because that's dumb.
Yeah,
and we need to do that, and there are probably benefits that outweigh the consequences. But
definitely,
I think that we need to be more careful and be thinking about these crazy scenarios that perhaps are not that crazy.
Right.
We need to be careful about what we're bringing back from asteroids. We're getting ready to go to Mars, and then we're going to go throughout our own solar system. We have planets and moons where we believe or have evidence of water. And I believe that when you find that, we should be automatically assuming that, okay, if there's water, then there at least could be microorganisms.
Right.
So we just need to be super careful about it. I would say, too, I think that there's one of these movies, well, a lot of these movies features this notion that we're going to bring everything back, all the way back to Earth. There is one movie, in Resurrection, right? Alien Resurrection, the 1997 movie, where they instead decide that they're going to do research and development on this thing,
right? On
the spaceship,
on the ship itself,
right? Instead of
on Earth, moving
it around, which at least
it's
somebody
contained.
Thought about it, yeah.
But with the history of that corporation, they would still probably want to bring samples back in some way, shape, or form.
Especially if it's now.
Yeah.
Somebody at the very least is going to say, "Oh, we can at least sequence it." But we've seen what happens with sequencing. Now we're able to take a sequence and produce synthesize the
Right,
organism.
synthesize an organism just from that code.
Yeah.
And the xenomorphs are, I mean, as far as we know, DNA based. And so are the engineers from Prometheus. They're DNA based.
And so are we.
And so are we, which makes the contamination, cross contamination, a lot more likely than if it was something that was not DNA based. And there are theories that, you know, like in the astrobiology world, that since there was so much transfer in our solar system early on when it was forming, that, you know, the precursors of life could have been spread out throughout the solar system. So it's not unlikely that if we go to Mars or we go to Europa, we're going to find DNA based life, if there is life. It's probably more likely than not that that's the case.
Well, I think that at least it should be considered as a possibility, a very possible possibility.
Right.
And, you know, so it's interesting in these movies, you see Ripley in particular over and over again. Like, why is she the only person that's worried about this?
Yeah, she's the only one that's like, no, we can't do this.
We can't do it. Even after, you know, time and time again. I can understand, like you said, the first movie.
Well, even Ripley was the most reasonable person on that show.
You can imagine that everybody else would, like, they're thinking something different.
Right.
You know, I can see that. But after that movie, well, even to begin with in that movie, no, I'm confusing with Aliens. Let's just say, you know, they have their big issue. Ripley escapes. She gets back to Earth.
Right.
She's debriefed everybody, right? She briefs everyone.
Tells
They
everyone
debrief
what
her.
happens.
I'm sure they have data. I'm sure they have film. I'm sure they have something coming off of that spaceship.
Yeah.
So they know.
And the corporation knew.
And the corporation knew about all this. So
because
now,
they directed.
but even if they had not, right? I'm saying after that first movie and the events that it addressed, after that, everybody should have known better. And it should not have been just her in the second movie, and the third movie, and the fourth movie.
Saying,
you know,
to the point where she basically has to kill herself at a certain point because she has.
Right.
And she knows, they're like, oh, no, we'll take it out. We'll take it out. But she knows what they're going to do with that when they take it out.
Right.
So she drops herself into and ends up killing herself. She knows the entire time. And that's the kind of sacrifice that kind of needs to happen in these situations when it's, especially on a spaceship.
Yeah.
You know, you have something on board, you can't bring it back to Earth. You kind of have to assume that you're all going to.
Well, or, I mean, look, JT, I think that at least there should be a strategy for what to deal with this. You know, where are the protocols? Where are the written documents about, you know, what to do in this situation, especially if if you're that company, you know you're going out to get something.
Right.
You could at least write a protocol, a standard operating procedure that says, look, just in case. You don't have to admit that you know anything, but you could say, just in case, this is what we want you to do, because it really only behooves them. You don't want everybody killing themselves. You don't want everybody dying. You don't want someone like Ripley destroying everything.
Right.
You have to be able to control it and its impact on human beings, animals, and whatever, somehow.
Right.
So I think that is, from a business perspective, I think it's unrealistic that they never seem to have any of that.
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't make sense because, and the interesting thing about these movies, we never get the reason, I feel like, why they want this bioweapon so bad. What's going on Earth that they need this?
I think
because
it's just about military
readiness,
dominance. Yeah, I mean that's like asking, why do people need nuclear weapons?
Fair enough.
People want them because they want them, basically, and they want that ability to have dominance. Of course, you're right, though. What is going on Earth, that it's so bad that people think they need this as a biological weapon. I mean, that they're clear about that in these movies.
Yeah, it's very clearly
biological weaponry. It's not like, oh, let's bring it back and study it just to study it, or we think we can, if we develop a countermeasure to this, then we'll have countermeasures to everything. No one ever says that.
Yeah, they're not even trying to develop countermeasures against the alien.
Right.
itself. They're trying to just turn it into a weapon.
Right.
So it's not even like gain of function research where there could be a sympathetic angle. Like, oh yeah, we're trying to do this to make a vaccine. Their entire purpose is like, we're weaponizing this. Which is interesting because that was the original purpose of the aliens in the first place with Prometheus, at least, or Covenant.
I was just going to say the same thing. But that alien race, the
they're gone.
So why are they gone, though? I mean, are they gone because of these?
Yeah. For lack of a better phrase, they fucked around and found out. I don't know if we'll keep that, but...
Up to you.
But no, they mess with these biological weapons that are really not that controllable, and the engineers are really nowhere to be found. Yes, there is some theory that those are the ones that I think David kills at the end of Covenant, or Prometheus. He kills a race, but they don't look the same as the engineer that we see in Prometheus. They look very different. They could have been either a different race,
an offshoot,
or us. Yeah, an offshoot. We still never see the engineers, but the engineers' main purpose, when they found him on that ship, they figured out was to go to Earth and wipe us all out.
And why was that? I don't remember. Why were they doing that?
There's a theory because they discussed in the movie that it was about, he was supposed to arrive around 2,000-ish years ago, the engineer. So the theory is that Jesus was an engineer.
Okay.
And he sent them down, or the engineers sent Jesus down as another engineer, and the Romans did what the Romans do, and they crucified him. And then the engineers were pissed, and they were like,
"Oh, so we have to get rid of this race."
Yeah, so we have to get rid of this race because we sent this guy down.
But don't you think it's interesting? So they sent,
because they created the humans in the first place, sent down engineer Jesus.
Okay.
We killed engineer Jesus, and then they sent the biological weapons to Earth, but the one that we find in Prometheus never made it.
Okay. But okay. Yeah, that's what's so interesting about it, though, is like, why? This is like the most difficult to control, for the most part, biological weapon ever.
Yeah.
And why would you want a whole planet of xenomorphs just running around after they kill all the human beings, the other animals, plant life?
How long does it take to extinguish itself? Like for a planet, if you're going to wipe all the life off of a planet, sure, it works. And then eventually all the xenomorphs will die off because they don't have hosts. How long does that process take? How long?
Why would that be a good idea? And also,
why would you want to get rid of all life?
If they're so advanced, why is this the thing that they've invested their resources in?
Right.
Couldn't they figure out another way to kill all of humanity?
Without unleashing something like this. You think that they would be able to. Because you still need the ecosystems on Earth for it. If the goo can infect worms and infect lower forms of life, it could probably infect plants. So now what? Now we have no trees, no oxygen atmosphere, no, Well,
it just implies that they're willing to just sacrifice the planet because they don't have any need for it. But I don't know that's...
You could always blow up the planet Star Wars style at that point. But,
But we don't know. We don't have that information. To know how advanced they are in that regard.
Yeah.
Okay.
What did you think of the military aspects of the second film? Because I know that one was... one was way more action-oriented, entertaining. The first film was, it's basically a horror film. The second film, I would say, is like an action film.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of the military gets brought in. They're not told exactly what's going on. They're like, Ripley, you need to come with us. And she's like, hell no. And then eventually she agrees because she's like, okay, if we're going to this planet, I need to know we're killing everything. Everything. That was what she agreed upon. So I'm curious for your thoughts, kind of on the military aspects of this stuff.
I thought it was very realistic. There's a lot that is said during that movie that is very typical of the military. It's very funny as a result from a military perspective. the things they do and the things they say, they're all in keeping with current day and even decades ago military. So I thought it was I thought it was the best part of the movie for me is all the way up until they actually encounter the alien, because it's just funny to listen to the militarisms and the things that they're doing. I do think that if there's a higher unknown purpose, which is to obtain one of these aliens and bring it back for biological weapons purposes, it makes sense that you would send the military. Right. Now, you would make more sense if one person knew what the mission was. Instead
of the whole squad, not.
Instead of everybody being clueless about it. Yeah, except for the android. Right? It doesn't. Is there an android in this one? Yeah. The first android comes back.
Right.
Right?
I think so.
No. No, this is where we see Lance Erickson for the first time.
Right.
Or Hendrickson, whatever his name is. But Ripley doesn't recognize him, so it's not the guy. It's not the same guy. The first one, right? It's
because the first guy was Ash.
Yeah.
I think.
Once she realizes, when he does the thing with the knife in the guy's hand, then she realizes,
that's not a human.
An android, and then she freaks out about it.
Yeah.
So he knows, right? He knows what they're.
He must know the purpose of the mission.
Doing, I think. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter whether he knows or not. I think if it was a military thing, it makes sense that you would want the military to go, and that you wouldn't tell everybody in that squad.
Like need-to-know basis.
Yeah. But one person would have a need to know because they're in charge. Now, what's funny about the movie?
What happens if that person dies?
Well, and that's exactly what happens, right? Yeah. That lieutenant is it is very typical. He was very blowhardy, and he was very into himself and his officerness. But he was young. He was a lieutenant, and he didn't know what he was doing, and who could know what they were doing anyway in that situation. So if he knew, that would have been a mistake, as to being the only person
that knows the true nature
what was going on.
Yeah.
But in that movie, there's a representative from the company that comes too, right?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what their name is. I'm trying to see it.
It's a man. It's a comedian. Yeah. What is his name? Now we're gonna.
Yeah, we can look it up.
You're gonna have to edit this.
We can edit this. I'm looking through it now. So Bishop was the android.
It's Paul Reiser. Burke. Yeah. So this time the company sends a company person.
An actual human.
Yeah, that guy.
So that's the guy who
knows. He knows everything.
Yeah. He does die, though.
He does die, but the point is, they did send somebody. Somebody knew everything that was going on with this mission. So I think from a military perspective, I mean, it's not great. This is not the best in terms of military action, provided the military knew anything. We don't know that. We just know that this one guy who's a company person, a contractor, basically, knows. I think that their approach to dealing with the alien is a little silly, because there's a lot of just regular ground tactics that
like
are
shooting
used and trying to shoot at it and trap it and do stuff. But they're Marines. They did not send a whole team out from USAMRIID, for example.
They didn't send a CBRN.
They didn't send the CBRN units. Yeah. They didn't do any of that. They didn't even send somebody from the Chemical Corps. They sent a squad of Marines. So
they're going to shoot at it,
But if you think about it, if the mission is really to bring something back, the Marines probably could do that. I mean, in terms of what they thought they knew about the alien,
threat,
right?
Yeah.
And if the mission, another mission would be to protect Sigourney Weaver's character, protect the civilian contractor, protect whoever they find on the ship,
Right.
then that's something the Marines would do as well. So it's not, out of the question. But it is interesting that here we are, we're talking about biology and we're talking about a different race, and yet there's nobody. We don't see anybody with that kind of background. We don't see anybody with a WMD background, and we don't have anybody there from NASA. We don't have any biodefense people. Or astrobiology people. It's an interesting
group of
premise.
Yeah, group of people that they sent out there.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about it is too, without that information, you're shooting at this thing. Now it's bleeding acidic acid into the hull of the ship.
Right.
Or wherever they
learning
are.
on the go.
You're learning on the go. I mean, Ripley's the only one there that can really tell them any information.
So, so good for them for bringing her, right?
Yeah.
That's why part of the reason they insisted, because somebody needed to have a little bit more information and knowledge on how to deal with this, with this entity. But I do think that one of the reasons that the commission called for the Department of Defense in one of our recommendations to review its policies and procedures, and they refer to it as their biodefense posture.
Right.
We originally recommended that in 2015 because before 2015, the Department of Defense had not updated that stuff since the late 70s, maybe early 80s, something like that. And that was still around the time
before this movie, probably.
Well, yes, or around the same time as the movie. But they were basing that review on having just shut down our own offensive biological weapons program,
right?
And probably assuming that not everybody else had done it, at least not yet, even if they trusted that everybody was going to shut down theirs. That's okay, but that was so many decades ago. So it's really good that that the Department of Defense did a biodefense posture review. They released the classified version, I think, 2 years ago, and then the unclassified version came out last year. I think it's great. We credit them for having done that and fulfilled our recommendation in that regard. But I think this also shows that part of that biodefense posture review shouldn't just be, okay, what is our posture? It also needs to incorporate some scenario-based planning.
Yeah. You can't have failure of the imagination.
Right.
You need to be... And it's not... these scenarios are out there. You just take the scenario from Alien. What would... It doesn't have to be public. But what would the military actually do?
Yeah.
In that situation? Plan for it, just as a contingency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know that... I don't remember the name of the general, but there was a general who, in recent years, grew very concerned about the possibility of a zombie apocalypse of some sort.
Yeah.
And he went back and he told the military, you need to use this as a scenario. How would we deal with this?
Right.
Now, I believe that the actual assessment turned out to be classified, but there are people who have written about it, and you're allowed to talk about it in that way, that it was done in an unclassified manner. Now, I know there were a lot of people who were like, oh, this is ridiculous. How dare the military waste resources on this?
Right.
But in keeping with what you just said, I think they should do that. And I think pretty much nobody's better than the United States military or the military across the world in coming up with crazy nutty scenarios and then planning for them. I do think that the Office of Net Assessment over at DoD, prior to Andy Marshall's death, he had been the director of that office for many, many decades and was really well trusted. And he just seemed to have this ability, this sense to be able to predict not just possibilities but probabilities, things coming down the path, and do these net assessments for the Department of Defense. That's not to say that the new people who replaced him couldn't do it either.
Yeah.
But I think that Office of Net Assessment and the DoD intelligence enterprise, including DIA and all the branches and their intelligence elements, they need to, if they're not already, they need to expand their thinking on this sort of stuff. Same thing with the DNI. We called for the creation of a national intelligence manager for biological threats. And, the intelligence community, it's not like they ever dropped this issue entirely.
Right.
But the intelligence community is not outward facing to the whole rest of the universe.
Exactly.
They're just focused on the planet. Now, we can debate as to whether in the Aliens franchise, whether the intelligence community should have known that all this nutty stuff was going on with
this corporation
and its relationship to the military and the relationship to the government and what was happening. But they have a role too. If DoD's not going to do it, I think the National Intelligence Manager should. It should be their responsibility to really stretch the mind and think about these kinds of scenarios. And then, there's a whole question here now too about collection. What does intelligence collection look like when you're talking about movies like this? Whose responsibility is it to think ahead? We are about to go to space. We are about to do it and be there and just have a continuous presence, not just jump up to the moon and come back. So we're building a moon base. We're going out to Mars. That means, we're going to wind up going everywhere.
Right.
What is the role of the intelligence community? And what will the National Intelligence Manager for Bio be doing? Because they can't just say, well, we're ending it with global health security and, that's it for us. But I think there are three entities. I think we're talking about the Department of Defense, at least for the United States, the Department of Defense, the Director for National Intelligence, and NASA. Because NASA is the other entity that does a lot with scenario-based planning.
Yeah.
And obviously they have the responsibility for planetary protection, and they have the responsibility for planetary defense once everything starts coming down the pike.
Yeah.
And, of course, in these movies, they don't really address what's happening on Earth, but it would be interesting to know.
To see what the political landscape is on Earth right now.
And did anybody bother to tell NASA?
Yeah.
But look, this is our plan. Probably not, right? We're going to bring this thing back. It's a corporation that thinks that this is a good idea. So why did they tell NASA?
And it's not that, and Prometheus isn't even that far in the future. I think it's in 2080. So how much could things have changed, in the next 60 years?
Yeah. Well, especially with technology, and the way it seems to, in and of itself, evolve.
But I think we can assume that DoD still exists. The intelligence community still exists. The United States probably still exists. I think we can assume those things. So it would be really interesting to see what the landscape is back on Earth.
Well, and, I know there's a separation between the private sector and the public sector.
Yeah.
But there's an implication here for whatever part of the intelligence community, whether we're talking about DIA or the rest of the intelligence community. At some point, somebody needs to find out what this company is doing. And it looks like, from the title of it, it looks like it's an international company, too. Yeah. It's not a foreign-based company. It's an international company. At what point is the intelligence community expected to figure out what's going on? Figure out because this is clearly, it's not just a national security problem, this alien thing. It's a global, it's a probably solar system-wide issue.
Problem. Yeah.
So I think it's, there's plenty here that we don't see. We don't know what the background is. Maybe all of this has been handled and we don't, we don't know.
Yeah. No, I think those are good points. I'm curious for your thoughts on the realism aspects of how this thing goes through its life cycle. And
see, I think, look, the thing is, I think it's pretty realistic in some ways. But then it's hard to take some of it seriously.
Right.
Because some of the special effects or just the way they make some of these beings look they're almost ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So there's the one, I think, that is like partly human.
Yep.
That has some of Ripley's DNA, I think, right?
Yeah, it looks kind of like humanoid.
It's got human eyes, and,
Yeah.
you know, and it thinks she's his mother, I think. I don't know. I can't remember which movie that was. The third one, maybe?
Third or fourth, but yeah, I remember that too.
That the way it just looked not real.
Yeah.
So, you know, if something doesn't look real, it's kind of hard to say, well, but still the scenario is realistic. You know,
right, exactly.
But I think the way the alien reproduces, with the eggs and the parasitic component, I think that's I never thought that it was unrealistic.
Yeah.
And I know you looked up some of what our colleagues are doing in terms of analysis and found that there are animals on Earth that do this.
Yeah, they'll do it to tarantulas, worms, other things, basically the same kind of process. And I think that's what Ridley Scott and Dan O'Bannon kind of drew inspiration from, was these parasitic wasps that kind of follow the same structure, where they begin with an egg. Then the eggs are implanted, kind of like a face hugger implants the egg or implants the thing into a person. And then they burst from within the creature, whether it's a tarantula or a caterpillar or something like that. And then turn it into a wasp.
Yeah. But, it also reminds me kind of like what happens with Ebola. And obviously Ebola is not parasitic, other than if you're going to say that a microorganism is parasitic. But this notion of something getting inside something else and sort of eating it up from the inside and destroying it. Yeah. There are all kinds of examples of it, whether we're just talking about animals or going all the way down to parasites or even cancer.
Right.
This idea of destroying something, to rebirth something else. And I did want to say, JT, there's a movie that has nothing to do with this called The Eternals.
I've heard of it.
Okay, so I think it's a Marvel thing.
Yeah, it's a Marvel thing, right?
So in the Eternals, they have a group of entities called the Celestials. Gotcha. And the Celestials are created by seeding planets with nascent Celestials. Those nascent Celestials require a large population of intelligent, sapient beings to grow. But then they too have introduced like an entity that, to control populations or to do something, and then they get out of control, and then the Celestials create yet another set of entities, but they're artificial beings, artificial intelligence-ish. Right. And they're supposed to fight the other things, and it's this whole thing. Putting all that aside, what happens with these celestial beings, they're seeded into a planet, and they grow and grow and grow and grow, and then when it's time for them to...
Do they become the planet?
They destroy the planet, and then they become these... You see them, the way they show them in the movie, as they're sort of floating out there in space, and they help other celestials sort of manage and control the universe.
Gotcha.
Okay? So when I was thinking about these movies, this idea seems to be
very
a
similar.
Common idea, and not just like, oh, this happens in the animal world, or this happens with diseases. It seems to be part of our culture.
Like an emergent property of intelligence.
Yeah. You have to destroy something to make something else live. But there are these consequences, right? There are these drawbacks.
Right. And I think that's like a really good point. And I think that's why it's interesting, looking, since we came from the engineers, apparently from this, we share the same DNA. They were apparently very violent, militaristic enough to make this ultimate biological weapon and go and try and exterminate worlds with it. Humans kind of got that as well, that same trait of violence and militarism in that way, I think that can be showcased if you look as far back as, the colonization of the Americas, where it was basically just wiping everybody out so that we could have that land. But then even all the way up to, where the movies take place with the Weyland-Yutani Corporation and, the android, I think Walter was his name, from Prometheus. And then he goes on and takes the black goo, which is like the precursor to everything, and goes and tries to and wipes out a planet himself. So it is interesting to see like that natural evolution. Like maybe it is something within the DNA, and that's kind of their point. Throughout the films. Yeah, I think it's really interesting.
It is interesting. I will say though that this reminds me that in Prometheus, it ends with just David, the android, and one of the last remaining scientist, right? Elizabeth Shaw. It ends with her saying, I don't want to go back there. She's talking about Earth. She says, I don't want to go back there. Yeah. I want to go up there. She decides she wants to go find out where these people came from, the engineers came from, and why, and all this. Again, I think, well, I don't have a problem with this notion, this determination
to intellectual
figure it out. But why would you go do that by yourself when you could go back to Earth, gather up resources, tell people what's going on,
like, hey, we're going up against a potentially super advanced race that made us. You need to bring, firepower.
Firepower, well, at least more people, more analytic capability.
Yeah, not just one person. What's she going to do?
What else you're going to find out? They created this one biological weapon. Who's to say that they aren't, didn't produce a whole bunch of other weird and strange and horrible things?
Right.
I just thought, okay. I mean, I get that the movie producers and directors were trying to get us to, okay, we're opening the door to another movie, so we need to believe that. But I do think that for me, when we talk about these movies, your question about realism, that in particular gets me. I know we're doing some stuff for drama. I know we're doing some stuff just, to have a good story.
Film,
but I don't think that people are this stupid in the name of research and knowledge. And
or even
learning.
just like emotion. Like, no, we have to let him back on.
Yeah.
Because he's my friend or
whatever.
Like, I don't know. Like, I just don't think that's realistic. When people go up into space, I feel like there's an understanding. You might not make it back. Kind of probably similar to how it is, and correct me if I'm wrong, like in the military because I'm reminded of, I think I've told you about that scene from The Rock in 1995 where Ed Harris's team goes in to steal the chemical weapons, somebody gets exposed, they close the door on him.
Right.
Because it's the only way the rest of the squad survives.
I agree with you that there is that notion.
Yeah.
And there are movies, and maybe we will review some of those in the future. But there are movies where somebody gets contaminated with something, and the captain of the ship says, "I feel terrible about this, but that person has to stay outside because if they come in covered with those chemicals, it's all going to get into the HVAC, and we're all going to die."
Right.
So that's too bad, but that's the way we do it. But I will also say this, from a military perspective, a U.S. military perspective, we went through some pretty dark times with Korea and Vietnam.
Yeah.
Subsequent to that, those two wars in particular, we came back and the U.S. military adopted a philosophy and a directive that we would not leave anyone behind.
Right.
And they drill it into you from the very beginning. Leave no man behind. Leave no person behind. Leave no woman behind. We will not leave anybody behind. It doesn't matter if they're dead. It doesn't matter if they're contaminated. It doesn't matter anything. We're going to go get them. And it gets, it gets really ingrained. So the notion of wanting to bring that person back is, and it's an American value.
Right.
And it might be a human value too. I don't want to rag on, other countries.
Others.
but
no, it's like a military and human emotion. Like, even if the person's dead, you want to bring the body back.
Right. We do that all the time.
We do that all the time. Yeah, we're still doing that.
Bringing back bodies. So, but knowing that, I think we have to assume that people are going to want to do that. So how do you do that when, in this kind of scenario, what counts as too dangerous?
Right. Like, how do you make that decision? Basically sentence somebody to death and being unrecoverable.
Right.
How do you make that decision?
Right. And can't you...
And to your
how
point,
much
it
of this
reminds me
can
of
you
Black
do in
Hawk Down.
advance? Yeah. Well, Black Hawk Down. I mean, that's a great example of a complete catastrophe.
Yeah. But, I mean, we went back in and did everything we could to get those few people out, regardless of how overrun.
Well, we see it over and over. I mean, look at what's happening with, pretty much every time Israel gets into it with another country there in the Middle East, you see Israel trading hundreds of prisoners for just a few Israelis to get them back. You see them expending enormous resources, sending in special forces teams. It's so expensive. Special ops are so expensive. Sending them over to do what? To rescue people. And I think as well we should. And I'm not saying even in the Aliens franchise that we shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, if at some point in these, 7 films, 8 films, whatever it is, at some point, somebody should be saying, okay, this is what we know about this alien. Okay, now if this happens, how are we going to ensure that what we're bringing back, people who died from being affected by the alien, infected by the alien, how are we going to be sure that when we bring them back, if we bring them back, that they're not going to further contaminate the entire planet? How are we going to do that?
I think Ripley is kind of... She's the only... I think that's her role throughout a lot of these.
Right.
Is being that...
To be that voice.
To be that voice saying, hey, we've crossed the line here. And we can't bring them back.
Yeah.
But for everybody else, that's a really hard decision to make.
Yeah.
It's not like Ripley was in the military or anything like that. I think, she was a warrant officer, a commercial warrant officer on a ship, but she just happened to experience those things. Okay. But I think, she embodies that kind of decision maker where it's like, we cannot keep going forward with this, to the point where she sacrifices her own life for it. But it is a really difficult dilemma, and I think everyone goes in with the expectation maybe that would be a norm, where it's like somebody gets infected, so you leave them outside and everyone's just kind of okay with it. But in reality, human emotion is going to play a huge role in that. Especially for astronauts, you spend a lot of time with these people. You've trained with them, you've quarantined with them.
Yeah, but if you have to, you have to. I would imagine you choose people who are going to be able to make that decision.
Right.
And you choose people who willingly understand that, okay, this has happened and I can't come back. But I think the problem in this case is you have an alien that, it's destroying the host in the first place.
And that it becomes a weapon in
and of itself. And it has some amount of sentience. It has some amount of intelligence.
Yeah.
So its whole thing is it's trying to get to wherever it can get to.
Right. To kill.
How are you supposed to, deal with that?
Yeah. And especially since if it bleeds blood. What do you do? Pretty much either have to burn it or burst it out of an airlock. Even burning it, I don't know.
Well, and then isn't there a question in this movie as to whether the aliens can survive in space?
Yes.
I think they can.
I think they can, because I do remember, I can't remember which movie it was, one of them got blown out of the airlock and then showed it, the alien kind of on the outside of the spacecraft, still alive or something like that.
I think so. At least for some amount of time, right?
Yeah. But the point is, they're like one of the many things that makes them a very scary biological weapon is that they are that durable. It's not going to take one round, from an assault rifle to kill them.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen them fire several shots and they still don't go down.
Mm-hmm.
They're super lethal. They're stealthy. They're intelligent.
Yeah.
And they're adaptable too. They're very adaptable. I remember when, again, I can't remember which movie, but it figures out how to go through the air vents to avoid detection.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically like the ultimate predator, which is funny to say because they do have the alien versus predator, but
yeah.
But the predators are actually smart. Like they're an intelligent species.
And the predators kind of don't they go after in Predator versus Alien?
Technically,
doesn't
it's not
the predator and a human being don't they team up finally?
Yeah.
So for the predator is way more. The predator is much more intelligent, I think, than
more able to like
alien.
human.
Yeah.
Like their reproductive cycle doesn't depend on this, weird cycle of infection and things like that. They're more akin to humans. It's just, I think in that movie, Alien versus Predator, they just hunt.
They're hunters.
They're hunters. Technically predators, but they picked the aliens in that movie because it's like, oh, this is the top thing that
right.
can hunt,
right,
and kill and get. So they'll send like a few that are going through a growing up process or something like that, like young ones, and they'll send them to Earth. And
yeah, but in that movie,
it's not canon. It doesn't technically.
But how did the aliens get to Earth? Do we know that?
I think it's implied, like in that movie, it's implied that the predators brought them there.
Oh.
Because they wanted to.
But that doesn't.
Because they needed the humans to do the reproductive cycle.
Oh.
They could have used predators, but if they used a predator, it would have been a lot more dangerous.
Yeah, but from what we know about from these movies, from the Alien franchise, it could be that the engineers sent the aliens down to Earth because they were trying to exterminate humanity.
Right.
For whatever reason. And then the predators just find out about it and are like, okay, now we're going to go hunt these because now they're conveniently sitting on this planet. Huh. Interesting. Okay.
That could be an interesting way to square it, because I know people are like, oh, that movie doesn't tie in, but I think that would be an interesting way to combine it. The engineers dropped them there, the predators just stumbled upon them.
They're paying attention.
And then the engineers kind of became like the new gods on Earth instead of the engineers. Because the engineers...
You mean the predators became the new gods?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so it's interesting. It would be very easy for them to just add like one scene to explain this background, just like Prometheus basically explains all kinds of stuff.
All kinds of stuff, like how, that's one of the things I like about it, even though a lot of people don't, because it complicates
I think the issue with Prometheus is not so much the content. I think it was a different kind of movie. It was the way it was shot. Even the colors are very different. The people who are acting in it are very different. The storyline is very different. The motivations are much more different. So I think it was probably just too much of a change, because you go from, you have Alien, and then Aliens, and then Alien 3, and then Alien Resurrection, and then finally we get to Prometheus.
Right.
Right? So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 movies where none of that stuff comes up.
None of it comes up.
The fifth movie comes up, and now it's like trying to find the origin of humanity. We're trying to do all this different stuff, and then we got the relationship between the android and the human guy, and and then one of the scientists also, really with her theories and stuff, she really wants to go and she wants to find out. In those first 4 movies, no one's talking about
where these
the
things
origin,
came from.
not even of the aliens. They're not even. No one's
Yeah.
talking about us. Where did we
No, yeah,
come
we're
from?
not the
Then
main-
suddenly we've introduced this notion, and I think they do a good job of tying it back to the engineers, right?
I think so too.
But it's so different, and
It's
I think
very
if you're just used to,
You know, your typical alien that
we have to fight it and whatever, then, we have a corporation that's trying to get a hold of something for whatever reasons, then suddenly you're over here
yeah.
with an extremely explanatory movie and some alien stuff.
Right.
I think it's one of the reasons
One of the
it
reasons
put people off.
Put people off.
Yeah.
And then Covenant was just more of the same, but with less explanation, which was
Yeah, less explanation and more implication.
yeah.
Implied stuff. Yeah, so for Alien Romulus,
Yeah, I was actually gonna say.
where is it now? Where is it in the timeline?
So Alien Romulus will take place between Alien, the first Alien from 1979, and Aliens from 1986. So it's in between those two movies.
Oh, so do you think they're going to return to that style?
I think that they are, and I think there's a desire to kind of move away from the Prometheus and Alien Covenant stuff and go back to like the roots of what people really liked about Alien.
Yeah, but now they're stuck
Yeah.
because now we have all this information, so that they're going to have to.
I mean, they could like retcon it and say it's not canon, like they did with the Alien versus Predator movies.
Well, but that doesn't work very well either. Look at what happened with Terminator.
Yeah.
I think you can only ignore so much, and you can only put people on a different timeline or whatever, and just say, like they did with Star Trek, like,
Yeah.
oh, we're over here now.
We're over here now.
That's okay, but they only did it the one time, right? And then they kept going. So I guess we'll have to see.
Do you want to see the Alien? Have you seen the Alien Romulus trailer?
No, I haven't.
Do you want to watch it quick? We can try and do a live reaction
Sure.
for the podcast. Okay. It's a new director.
This is really where you want to spend the rest of your life.
No, I don't.
But this is all I'm going to take it out of there. Just
Yeah, Ridley Scott is back.
Yeah.
Is that Amelia Clark?
What's that?
I don't know.
Stephanie.
Okay. Aliens in the water.
It's just something in the wall.
Aliens on the face.
Who's on us?
Open the door, come on.
Right.
Watch red.
Human beings running in space. Okay.
Watch it.
No one can hear you. Okay, come on. Interesting. Okay. Melting.
Are you sure you want to do this?
Yeah, it looks like it's a return to... Well, it looks exactly like something that's between Alien and Aliens. Yeah.
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 So
Well, it looks, the thing of it is, after all of this, and despite some of these movies being maybe overly esoteric, and maybe lacking investment in special effects,
Yeah.
Still, it's like the Star Wars franchise. People want to
People
go back
wanna
and see them.
Go back and see them, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for it. I hope it's a return to form. I know Ridley Scott saw it because he's not directing it, but he's producing it.
Mm-hmm.
But he said it looks amazing. But
Okay.
I guess if he's producing it, he would say
Well,
that,
I don't
yeah.
know that he put his name on something that looks stupid.
No,
right? He
everything
doesn't
that I've
have
seen
to.
his name on is usually because I don't even know if his name was on Alien 3 and 4. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I'm excited for it, and that comes out August 16th, 2024.
Okay. Okay.
So we'll definitely have to do a podcast about that once it comes out.
Okay. So, do you have our rating system?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then we'll wait.
We'll wait.
We'll
for
wait
that.
to rate it.
Yeah. Because I might be rating a whole franchise too.
Yeah. Well, maybe we shouldn't. Should we?
For this one, or in general.
But what do we do when we have something that's, well, I guess for a series, a television series. So okay,
You
so
would-
look,
yes,
if
you
we,
would
if
rate
we
the entire
if we
series.
rate the current set of movies,
Right. How is that different than
and
a
then when we
series?
see the new one, are we going to rate the new one, or are we going to rate the new one as part of the group and re-rate the entire group?
It's a good question.
Then
I think we would rate the new one by itself. And then maybe say how it improves or reduces the score
Okay.
of the entire franchise, depending on what we think of it.
Okay.
That's what I would think.
Okay. Well, I think there's a lot to learn from these aliens movies. I think they're interesting.
Especially given how not old, but
Well, yeah. I mean,
it's been in the
there's-
conversation since the 70s at least.
I think these issues, transcend time. I bet if
Yeah.
we looked back, we would find,
find stuff
the
from the
notion of
30s and
monsters and
40s
stuff goes
and-
back so far. But what I think is good about this movie is these movies, is that they introduce the notion of a parasite.
Yeah.
Whether it's a microorganism and, whether it starts as a microorganism or not,
Right.
we don't really see that. But parasites can be biological weapons. They can. There's no
Absolutely.
reason they can't be. And
Yeah.
there are plenty of parasites out there that nobody's going to have to create, that people could just grow and utilize.
Right. And utilize in whichever delivery method
Mm-hmm.
is most suited to the parasite. Obviously, it wouldn't be something as horrifying as with an alien.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, no one makes that. But, these things exist.
Mm-hmm.
Here on Earth, parasites have very similar, if not the same biology as what we see in Alien, except for the fact that, an 8-foot-tall monster doesn't jump out of.
Yeah. But you know what? It speaks to the
chest, but-
need, the continued need for science and technology, for research and development, really.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we have these things, we could be, granted, they're at the scale of a wasp and a worm or whatever.
Right.
But we can be studying them, and I guess we are. But I think this idea of extrapolation,
Right.
to something that's bigger, something that would affect humanity, et cetera. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think that's fair too. I think the interesting part of this as a biological weapon, we didn't really talk about it too much, but it's the terror
Mm-hmm.
aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
For a bioterrorist, like where your main goal is terror and making people scared and uncomfortable. That's why everyone was so afraid of Ebola, because they were like, oh,
Mhm.
you're bleeding out of all your,
Mm-hmm.
your eyes, your mouth.
You're melting. Yeah.
You're melting. And this is kind of like a version of that makes it very terrifying, and you see that happen to someone near you, it's going to have that effect.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I think that's a really interesting part of it as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so we are going to
Let's rate it, man.
rate this franchise not film by film, but the entire franchise, because that's kind of to date. So not including Alien Romulus. We have 10 categories, and then we average them all together to get a final score. The categories are rated on a scale from 0 to 5. 0 being the lowest score, and it's usually it has to be something egregious to get a 0. And then 5, we think it did a really, really good job of addressing that category. So our first category is relevance to our recommendations, here at the commission. And I think, we agreed on a 3.
Let's give it a 3.
Yeah, a 3 for this one. Because it does have relevance to our Asha Biodefense recommendations, has a lot of relevance to
our defense posture review
recommendations.
We talked about the National Intelligence Manager from Bio.
Yeah.
And actually the need for a strategy, too.
Right, yeah, just the need for a strategy. And then also even some of our other recommendations like biosafety and just containment and PPE.
Too, we didn't talk about it, but if you think, after the first movie, somebody knew that, well, Ripley knew, but others knew that we have this issue with these xenomorphs. Somebody should have come up with clinical care guidelines.
Yeah,
on the off chance that somebody gets infected, because they seem to every single time.
Every single time they go out.
Yeah, and then you could even make a case for biodetectors, I guess, to detect these large things, and you could make a case for science and technology, like the whole Apollo program.
Yeah, exactly.
What does a countermeasure look like for something like this?
Yeah,
but I think it only gets a 3 because they don't really. There's nothing illustrative in the movie in terms of the implementation of our recommendations. It's just that our recommendations make sense.
Yeah, they're relevant.
Because this movie shows you what happens when you don't do all that stuff.
Right. And it also shows you, biological weapons development and things like that.
Yeah. So I'd say we give it a 3.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so the second category is scientific accuracy, and that's mostly related to the biology of the organism and the life cycle and things like that. And I think a 4 is fair here, just because it is on the basis of parasites that we can find here on Earth.
Yeah.
And while those are just wasps and worms and spiders and on a much smaller scale, this scales it up, and I think it does a good job of doing that.
Yeah. I think so. I agree. Let's give it a 4.
Okay. And then 3, the category is the scenario development. How believable is the scenario? How realistic is, do we think, if we suspend disbelief, is this scenario? What are your thoughts on that one?
I think it gets a 5. I think it gets a 5 for this, because there's nothing. I don't think we watch any of these movies and think there's something missing, or there's something illogical, like we're missing an argument somewhere for something.
Right.
You just watch it and it's immediately believable, but yet not anything we have seen on this planet. And for each movie, they do something different. While some of them are very similar, you have different versions of this parasitic organism.
Right, and
you have different explanations for things. We didn't even have anything weird in Prometheus. The engineer has DNA, and we see the DNA.
Right. So DNA is consistent throughout all of this. So it makes it believable. I think. So I
give it a 5. Okay.
Okay. So then our fourth category is entertainment value.
Well, look, here's the thing, though. I think they're all entertaining. They're entertaining enough for everybody to keep going back, even after some of the ones that we don't think were as good as the other ones.
Right.
But some of them are not as good as others.
Right, like Alien 3.
Yeah. So I think
4.
I think we're really starting at a 3. But because everybody keeps coming back, I think that makes it, automatically you're bringing it up to a 4. because it's entertaining. Why else would you keep coming back? It's not, you're not
Right.
coming back because it's high science. You're coming back because it's entertaining.
Right.
And you want to see what happens. What's the new thing that happens with the alien?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think a score of 4 is, especially with like the first 2 films being as iconic
Yeah.
as they are, entertainment value, I think, as a 4, and the fact that they're making a new movie and a lot of people are really interested in it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think a 4 is a good number for that category.
Okay.
So for our 5th category, I'm calling it success of the imagination,
Okay.
which basically just means how creative are they.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes from the idea of failure of imagination, where you know, a lot of times when we're thinking about biological weapons threats or WMD threats, there is often a failure of the imagination to imagine what is possible.
Yeah.
Example with COVID, asymptomatic spread. That was a failure of the imagination. So this category, success of the imagination, gives kudos to those filmmakers and those writers who can really think outside the box.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, this is a solid 4 out of 5, probably.
You don't think you'd give it a 5? I give it. See, the reason I
Oh,
give
no, actually,
I
yeah.
would give it a 5 because, first of all, the first movie was completely different. It was not like
Right.
anything we had ever seen before,
Especially for the time.
especially for the time.
Right.
It was, you know, sort of a combination of horror and science fiction. So, I think he gets it on that, and I think that I don't think that any of the scenarios used in any of these films were lacking
Imagination.
I think
Yeah.
people really sat down and tried to be imaginative. They had to figure out
What does it look
what
like
new
in a
thing
dog?
to do. Yeah,
What
you
does it
know.
look like in a person? What does it look like when it infects a worm?
Some of
So,
it
yeah.
kind of failed a little bit in terms of execution. Some of the outcome xenomorphs didn't look that great because they didn't put enough money into the
Production.
the production or
Yeah.
the science, the not the science and technology, into the special effects. But the scenario itself, I mean, the creativity of it, somebody sat down and said, hey, well, let's do something
Yeah.
with a dog. Let's do something with whatever. So I think it gets a 5. I don't know that
Yeah.
it gets much better than this.
No, I think you're right. You convinced me, especially with that first film and the time that it came out.
Well, and even
Like,
I
who
know
would have thought of that? Like, and
Prometheus, somebody had to
I
sit
still
down
think
and
that
come
is
back
super
with
creative.
the whole background and the thing
whole
and how the
history,
engineers looked and
how engineers started humanity, and
why.
yeah.
And,
So now you're going back thousands
and
of years to
I think
establish
it's good
this.
that they left a bunch of stuff out of the story. Like
Yeah, a lot of questions.
We don't. Lots of people are filling in with theories, which I think is good. That
Right.
means not only is there a success of the imagination on the part of whoever wrote it, but also there's success in that it's provocative. It's making other people think and try and figure stuff out.
Right, and thinking that their own imaginations, trying to come up with theories or fill in things. So yeah,
Yeah.
I completely agree.
I think it gets a 5.
it's a 5. Okay, category 6 is the shock value or surprise value. How many times throughout the film, or the films, were you genuinely surprised and shocked by something that occurred? I think the first film does this the best.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them, don't. The first film, I think we were writing that alone, it would get a 5. But some of the others, it is kind of expected when you're getting, you're going to get an alien of some kind. Sometimes you don't always know what it is. What do you think?
Well, I don't think it's a surprise. After the first one,
Yeah.
nothing about it really is surprising. You know what the
Right.
alien is. We know as an audience.
Until you get to Prometheus.
Un-
And then maybe, and then it's surprised that where they came from. But it's not
Yeah, but
really a
that's not
shock.
really
It's not a
surprise.
shock value.
Yeah,
it's
it's
not
more
like
like it's an explanation.
Exactly.
Yeah, so the thing is, I guess I'm saying they're not doing anything new with the alien. The alien, the xenomorph, is attacking like it always attacks.
It's reproducing like it
infecting,
always.
it's
Yeah.
reproducing, it's parasiting away. I don't think that stuff is surprising. But what is, like, we're scared, I think. You know, these are horror movies. So
Right,
we're
it's a
scared when
horror
something
movie.
comes out. I'm not saying, when we talk about surprise, we're talking about something we didn't even imagine was going to be the case.
Right.
Something came out of, like, total left field. And I would not say that that's the case with these movies. We know after that first movie
what
we're looking at.
what
You
we're
know,
expecting.
and maybe, okay, they might mix something up a little bit in terms of
Right.
how,
Or they might have a jump scare.
yeah.
I don't think that counts.
That doesn't count for
'Cause a
what
jump-
we're talking
yeah,
about.
Because a jump scare is temporary.
Right.
It's not like something like where you're sitting after thinking like,
Wow.
oh my gosh, wow.
Yeah.
Was not
Yeah.
expecting
It's
that.
not a
It's not a
Luke-
thought-provoking.
It's not a Luke,
Yeah.
I am your father moment.
Right, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'd say I'd give it a 3 because
Yeah, I agree.
the first one was so surprising. It's kind of not fair to the other ones that they're not. And the thing is, like, if you watched each one of those movies individually, meaning
You've never
if
seen
you never
Alien
saw
1
any of the ones before or after, you just saw the, like, movie number 3 or movie number 5, then it would
individually.
be surprising to you.
Right.
It's like the Terminator movies.
Exactly.
You would be
Perfect.
surprised.
Yeah, I agree. If you had never seen any of the previous films, then yeah, there's going to be that horror element that really gets you in
Yeah.
each individual film. Some of them do it better than others, but it's always there. But that's dependent on whether or not you've seen
Yeah.
any of them before.
Okay, let's give it a 3 then.
Yeah, so I think a 3.
Okay.
Okay, so category number 7, we're going to rate this on the policy that was, introduced in the film or talked about, government procedure, oversight, military involvement, leadership qualities. I think whatever's happening back on Earth, which we don't get very much information about, there's no oversight for Weyland-Yutani. At least because they're trying to just get biological weapons throughout the entirety of the film franchise. So there's no oversight. There's not really good policy. We don't know what's happening back on Earth, but I cannot imagine, because Prometheus takes place in 2080. I can't imagine things have gotten that bad where there's government endorsement of this.
Right.
Of trying to find a biological weapon that's pretty much capable of wiping out a planet.
Well, and I can't also imagine,
You
I
know.
cannot imagine that the government, after finding out what happens in all those subsequent movies,
Even just with Alien 1, after they figure it out.
after
If
they figure it out, I can't imagine, I really can't imagine
Because
any
they do send in
government
the
saying,
military.
let's
Send the
keep bringing all
Marines.
this stuff back to the United States. Like,
Yeah.
I can't see it happening, no matter how bad government gets.
Yeah, or even sending in the military and just sending in a regular squad of Marines and not a CBRN unit or a special ops unit. Just nothing against regular Marines, but
Yeah.
they're not equipped for that kind of a scenario.
Well, and also I think for these movies, look, what we're really saying is there's only one person who keeps standing there saying, this is a bad idea. You
Yeah.
should not do this. You should not bring this stuff back. And that person is
It's
Ripley in most of the movies when she's in the movie, and then it's somebody else. And but it's like one person against
It's
everybody
always like
else.
one person, and yeah, for those first four, Ripley's not a scientist.
Yeah.
She's an engineer, like a
Yeah.
shipper. Like she's not a.
Yeah, but so I mean they're doing it intentionally though. That's why we have these other
Right.
categories. But I would give it a 1.
I agree.
Because it's just terrible. It's terrible biosafety. It's terrible planetary protection.
Terrible.
It's terrible biosecurity.
It's even terrible business leadership.
It's terrible business leadership. It's an uncontrollable biological weapon for us.
For us, it was for the people that created us, apparently.
So
So yeah, I
in
think
so many ways.
the only reason it gets a 1 and not a 0 is because Ripley, and she's such an amazing character,
Right.
and Sigourney Weaver does an awesome job
Right.
as her, and she's always the voice of reason.
Well, and I think in the other movies too, there's always somebody
one
who
character.
says,
Like I think
we can't let this get back to Earth.
I think maybe in Prometheus it might have been Elizabeth Shaw.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Covenant I can't remember who it was, but yeah,
Yeah.
it has to be a 1 because there's no one saying like, hey, let's slow down and take a look at what's actually
Yeah.
happening here and set some guardrails. So I think it has to be a 1.
Okay.
So category 8 is portrayal by the actors, how they were portraying their characters. So this is not how the characters were written, it's whether or not the characters were believable as themselves in a scientific role or whatever role they were in, and how well they did given the written content that they were given.
Right.
And I think it might have to be a 5, just because every character, I think, or actor did a good job portraying what they were given. None of them were really stumbling over the scientific aspects of what they were talking about. It was, despite the fact that some of them the characters themselves made stupid decisions as scientists. I don't think that that was an actor problem. I think the actors did a good job doing, portraying those, those people. And especially like again, I keep going back to the first film, but those people weren't scientists. You had one person on there that was the chief medical officer that was on board, and then the robot.
Yeah.
So I think like the acting.
I agree.
Sigourney Weaver, again, is amazing, and I think they had a lot of amazing actors in this.
Yeah, I don't remember thinking in any of the movies that the problem was
the acting. Yeah, nobody was unbelievable. It was sometimes the situations that they were put in, but that's not the actor's fault. So I think a 5.
Okay.
So category 9, that's where we'll talk about direction and directors. How well was the movie directed? How well was it put together? Kind of, how not the entertainment value per se, but how well the movie was constructed and put together. I think all of them are really, most of them.
Well, I think what's hard about this is for this particular franchise, like I think 2 of them were directed by Ridley Scott, and then 2 of them are directed by somebody else, and then another person comes in, and then Ridley comes back, and so
it kind of.
But you can tell, that there's a difference in how they're directing things. This is as opposed to something like, like the early Star Wars movies,
right?
Where they're all George Lucas,
right? And you knew.
There's a commonality. Yeah, there's some consistency there. But I would say that for me, I think they're all directed pretty well, very well. I think there are some that suffer from what the content was. So Prometheus, I think the problem and the advantage of Prometheus both is that it's a very explanatory movie.
Yeah, a lot of exposition.
How much play do you have as a director? You have to explain something.
Right.
You're not going to be able to come in with too many spectacular special effects. You're not going to be able to zoom in on, I don't know. I don't know how creative you can be with a storyline in which an engineer sacrifices himself and then you see DNA. What?
Right.
I don't know.
But visually, I think it.
Prometheus was visually stunning. I think
they did.
It's beautiful. You could turn off I think you could turn off the sound.
Yeah.
And just watch that movie. It was gorgeous.
Yeah.
And I think particularly in the theater, especially when they get to the planet or whatever it is. It was
a beautiful.
It was
movie.
Amazing.
Yeah. So I think that and that's part of directing is making sure that all looks good.
And also I think the part of directing, the way somebody's directed somebody or something well, partly, is that the audience comes along. The audience isn't sitting there like, okay, I'm gonna look at my watch 400 times, or I'm gonna go get something to eat while the movie is still going.
Which is how I felt during Alien 3 and 4 a little bit.
Yeah. So I wouldn't give them. I don't think they're all perfection.
Yeah.
I think I would give it a 4 overall. 4.
Yeah, I agree. I think a 4 is fair. Because a lot of the films I think were directed really well, but then you had a couple. And it's not that those people aren't good directors. I mean, David Fincher is amazing.
But it wasn't his best work.
But it was not his best work. And who knows, that could have come to production timelines, things like that.
Not everything is under a director's control.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that could have been like a producer coming down or something like that, or he didn't have
We
enough
only
time.
have so much budget, although I
Yeah.
will say all of these movies seem to have a pretty big budget.
Yeah. But I completely agree. I think a 4 is fair. And then let's move on to the last category, which is, production value. How do you think?
Well, they're big budget films, right?
Yeah.
So the question is, does the quality, so it's cost and quality for the most part.
Yeah, cost and quality.
I think they're all pretty good production value. I wouldn't say that any of maybe that last one, the one after Prometheus, Covenant. There's a lot of,
a lot of CGI.
And weren't they in a cave for a long time?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. It didn't, but it wasn't fake looking either.
Right.
It did look like what it was supposed to look like. I give it a 4.
Yeah.
There's only so much they can work with.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, the practical effects of the first 2 movies for that time were so impressive.
Yeah. I didn't know. Didn't you say that
There's no visual effects.
The
alien's a puppet.
The face puppet thing is a puppet. I mean, the face alien is a puppet. It does not look like a puppet.
Yeah. No, even like the actual xenomorph itself is a puppet.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Like the big alien itself, it's a puppet. All practical effects. As far as I know, there wasn't any visual, like VFX, or computer generated things. So for the time, that was amazing. Like that's like an incredible achievement.
Yeah.
So I think they just
especially, and I would add here that these movies all hold up. Like you can go back and watch
Alien 1, and it does not look bad.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of practical effects versus VFX or CGI. You go back and watch some movies from the early 2000s that have CGI, and you're like, wow, this looks awful.
Yeah.
The practical effects, they hold up with time. A lot of the times, like I think in like 2001: A Space Odyssey, other movies like that, they're using miniature ships and just scaling everything back, and so it looks real, like it was something that somebody built. So it holds up over time a lot better.
Interesting. Okay.
So I got to give high marks.
What are we giving this one? A 4? Is that?
I think a 4 because, and the reason I'm hesitating from a 5 is because they're in Alien 3, I think, and 4 maybe, when there was like the human hybrid with the xenomorph.
Oh yeah.
It did not look good.
Yeah.
It did not look good. So I think I have to dock it a point for that because it was just so.
Yeah. And then remember.
Did it look realistic?
But remember the first one too, not in the first one, in the second one with aliens, they have, they're moving, they're like the heavy mover things, like so you step into like this big yellow rig. Remember?
Oh, like it was like an exo.
I don't know what it was called. Like it was, but it would allow you. Basically, you created it was an exoskeleton.
Yeah, an exoskeleton.
That would allow you to lift really heavy things and move around, and I mean, it just looked silly. It wasn't.
They used that to try and kill one of the aliens at one point.
At the
right?
end, yes, that's Ripley's famous, thing about. Get your hands off her, you bitch.
Yeah, exactly.
She's in the thing, right? So that.
It didn't look.
But at the same time, it's not an unrealistic thing.
Well, no, I mean,
it just looked not amazing.
Not amazing
for a spacefaring
civilization. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so we're gonna give that one a 4.
We'll give that a 4. So, with all 10 of those categories averaged out, that gives us a final score of 3.8.
Okay.
For the entire franchise, which is, it's a good score. And
I think it's a good score, and I think it's realistic considering we have so many movies that were kind of all over the place.
Right.
They're not all the same, and weren't all equally awesome in each one of these categories. I think that, our listeners would have to remember that we're rating the whole group.
The whole
today,
group to get
not each one individually. I think if we did like the first one individually, I think it would probably get
high
probably
4
get a
or 5. Yeah.
You know, all the way across. I think it would probably get a 5.
Yeah, I think so too. And the second one,
The second one,
maybe a 5 as well. But
well, I don't know. The one thing we'd have to see is how well subtracting the part about our recommendations. Right. We'd have to go back and really see how each one of those addresses our recommendations. But yeah, you know, so good. 3.8, I think is good. It's close to 4.
Yeah, it's close to 4.
And really, it lost points. It would have been a 4 or more, but for the stupidity of people wanting to bring this stuff back to Earth
and how the policy
and the
was
poor
just...
policy, the poor biosafety, the poor everything. But you know, you can't rag on it either to too much of an extent because that is part of the story.
Right. That they're not expert, like, at least in the first film.
There's a person who's fighting for biosafety and planetary protection, while everybody else is either neutral about it or doesn't care about that.
Yeah, is actively working against it, kind of.
Yeah. But we still had to give it a 1 because that's the case in every single one of these.
It's just the case of it.
You can't say that it's right.
Yeah, completely agree.
Okay.
But yeah, so 3.8. We'll see how Alien Romulus does, and we'll definitely be covering that on the podcast as well once it comes out. Yeah, thank you all for joining us. Again, my name is JT O'Brien.
Okay. Asha George.
All right, and we'll see you guys next time.